You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. We're pleased to announce our podcast is now a member of the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle and me at leadersandlegends.net. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is General Stewart Goodwin, the Executive Director of the Indiana War Memorials Commission, and someone who, as much as anyone I've ever met in my life, and I've known him for about 15 years, gets things done. You ask and he makes it happen. General Goodwin, we thank you for being on the podcast today. And I should also introduce our co-host, Danielle Shockey, CEO, Girl Scouts of Central Indiana. Danielle, as always, when we have you on the podcast, it's ladies first.
Fabulous. I love it. Thank you so much, Robert. And thank you, General Goodwin, for joining us today. So Executive Director of the Indiana War Memorials Commission is a mouthful. And so for our listeners who may not fully understand what that really means, can you tell them what that means and kind of what is in your scope of leadership, the 25 acres of property, and what makes this a really, really special job that you do here in Indianapolis?
Well, I'm glad to. First of all, I want to thank you. It's an honor for me to be considered with the group of people that you've normally interview. This all happened after World War I, which was 1914 to 1917, and 1918 is when it was over. We were only involved with the last 19 months of the war, 1917 and 1918. And so this is a war that killed 55 million people. Really big numbers when you think about the wars, other wars that we've had during our history. And so there were 10 million military killed, 7 million civilians, and then 50 million people died of that pandemic. And usually before 2019, when we talked about pandemic, people would just kind of, shake their heads. And now that we've been through one or getting through one, this pandemic that happened after World War I was totally different than the one that we've experienced now, because this pandemic that we've been doing is basically attacks people that are 65 and older. The pandemic back in those days attacked people that were between 20 and 40. And so military people, young people that were greatly influenced by this. And it was a time, and I now that I've been through the pandemic in 2019, and how we were just kind of lost at the very beginning, didn't know what to think, didn't know what was going to happen. You heard the very worst, you've heard what might happen. Well, when you think about all the technology and all the communications that we have now that tells us things, and people are doing tests, and we get a vaccine very quickly. Think about in 1917, 1918 timeframe, when they didn't have 24-hour news. They didn't have instantaneous knowledge about that business. And so the other thing that happened is that World War I was a war where we actually rode into that war on horses, and we flew airplanes out of the war. And so what happened was that what spread this pandemic so much faster than what happened with us was the fact, for the first time, we had people going from continent to continent on airplanes, and they didn't know about masks, they didn't know about spreading it, they didn't know about all the different things, which is why it spread so quickly. Well, anyway, the question about why the commission became about was because after the war, the Hoosiers started to count how many people had served and how many people had died. And it turned out there were 135,000 Hoosiers who served and 3,709 who died. And so what they, another term that has been very popular lately, special session, they had a special session of the Indiana legislature in 1920 to put together a plan about how they would honor these Hoosiers who served and the ones that died. And so what they did was in 1920, they had this special session. And what came of it was the fact that they decided to allocate 2 city blocks that turned into 5 city blocks. And they allocated $2.2 million at a time when a gallon of milk costs a nickel. So we're talking about real money here to honor these Hoosiers. And that's where our properties came about. And what they did was that they decided that each congressional district should have a representative because we are a state agency. The governor watches over us as he does all the agencies. And so what happens is that this was something that was very interesting because to help finance this, they actually took some money out of the soldiers' pockets of money that they had coming to them at the very end. And the thing was that that was one of the contentious part about it.
And so I've heard you tell the story, General, about how you were ultimately asked to serve as this executive director role. And in my mind, I picture you at home eating ice cream, chilling out for the evening. So tell that story about the phone call when you actually got asked to serve in this amazing position.
Well, you may be thinking about the one that happened recently with Governor Holcomb on the first term to go to his second term. Of course, the agency heads, we all talk to each other, and each governor, and I've had the honor of working with Governor Daniels, Governor Pence, and Governor Holcomb. Each one time it's been different. And so we're all talking to each other. Have you heard anything? And, have you known anything? No, nobody's hearing anything. Some of the higher cabinet level positions were chosen. And of course, the ones that are down, farther down the road, we hadn't heard anything. And so what happened was I was sitting there watching a game one night, sitting on the couch, and the phone rang, and he says, "Hey, it's Eric." And he's not Eric anymore. He's the governor, or sir. And so I said, "Hey, sir, how you doing?" And he said, "You got a minute to talk?" "Yes, sir, I sure do have a minute to talk." And so he said, "I want to talk to you about, about being in my administration." And I said, "Well, that sounds great. Well, before we go any further, in the military, you're taught that somebody senior to you calls you. The goal is to get off the phone as fast as possible. This is not the time to talk about problems. This is not the time to bring up your favorite pet peeve that you want the boss to tell you about or to do something for you." And so he says, "You can let me know." And I said, "I can let you know right now. I'd be honored to do that." And so this was the first time. And so what happened was that he said, I'm trying to get off the phone with him. And he said, hold on. He says, "I got some things I want to ask you about, talk to you about." "Oh, yes, sir." So we went on, and I'd known him since back in the Daniels days, and just a really nice guy. And so we were winding up the conversation, and he says, "I want to tell you something." And I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "I want you to know that I don't believe in mandatory retirement." And I about fell off the couch. I couldn't think of anything that would be more congratulatory than for him to say that, especially in today's world where, different groups are castigated because of their age or because of whatever. But I got to tell you, he's a great boss. And the fact that he's a veteran, I think that's very important. And he and the First Lady have just been nothing but kind to me. And some of the things that we do for them is that sometimes they'll have people come in town and they have an hour or 2 hours before their plane takes off, and he sends them over, and we take them on a tour. And actually, we've got some donations that way as well. So it's it's the best job, obviously, that I ever had. And I was the chief of staff for the Indiana Air National Guard, then the commander, and then the assistant adjutant general. So those are pretty good jobs, but nothing like this, because the best part about this job is that I get to be with veterans all the day. And some of the stories, and the other thing that that may be interesting to you is that about 7 or 8 years ago, we started working with hospices. And so now we're working with 8 different hospices in central Indiana. And so what happens is that the different organizations, they find out they have a veteran on their service, somebody that's gone into that program and is close to passing. And so we get their 214 or their discharge papers, and we memorize them, and we go sit with them. And I could just sit here for hours and tell you probably done 400 of them. And we want them to leave this planet knowing that their service was honorable. We want them to know that somebody cares about them, and we want them to know that they did something that only 1 out of 10 people who live in our country today have done. And so it's in the stories, just, I don't want to take all the time up about this, but I can tell you that I'll just tell you this one story. And so well, this guy was in Europe. He'd been in World War II. He was 97 years old, and he had earned a Purple Heart. And so, but I couldn't tell on his discharge papers what battle he was in. And I was really concerned about the battle. And so his name was Sonny. And so I asked him, I said, Sonny, tell us about the day you earned the medal. And it's really funny because these guys, 96, 97, I've had them over 100 years old. And what they'll do is that you ask them a question and you can see that their the Rolodex inside their head is moving at about Mach 2. And they're trying to pull this up. They couldn't tell you what they had for breakfast, but they could tell you who their first sergeant was in World War II. And so he's trying to get that information. And he said, I said, where did you get it, Sonny? And he said, in the butt. And I said, no, not the bullet. I said, what battle were you located in? And of course, there were 40 people in the room, and there were 4 generations of people. And the next thing you know, those people are on the floor laughing. And I'm just I'm struck silly, but I don't know what to say. And he and I don't think it's all that funny at all, but they're laughing their heads off. And I said, no, Sonny. I said, what battle were you in? And Robert, you'll get a kick out of this. He was in the Battle of the Bulge, one of the worst times in the history of our country. And he got shot in the butt. And there was this crazy uncle that was sitting over in the corner. And he said, he probably was running away from the enemy, which I wasn't going to put up with that for a minute. And so I said, no, hold on here, bud. I said, a lot of people get shot in the butt. And the reason is because when they're laying in a prone position, their bottom is one of the highest points of their body. Well, he's grumpy about that. I said, this guy he's a hero. He got shot. And so anyway, to finish this up real quick, what happened was I was walking out the door, and this little lady comes walking up to me. She's about 4 foot nothing. And she said, General, can I give you a hug? Absolutely. So she gives me a hug. And the next thing you know, she says, I want to tell you something. And I said, well, what's that? She said, I've been married to that man for 69 years. And I never knew where he got shot. Now I'm thinking, being married to somebody for 69 years, you'd know everything about that person. But it just goes to show about the fact they didn't talk about those things back in those days. And the fact is that talking to these guys and just, telling them stories and hearing their stories is definitely one of the best parts of my job.
No, thanks for sharing that story, General. And I've heard it before, and every time it gets me. So it's a good one. I think it tells a great picture of a service you provide. So Indianapolis and the properties and the activities that you do really is like no place else in the country. And so I know, and I don't want to be wrong, but aren't we like second only to one other part of the country in the number of memorials that we have in central Indiana?
That's exactly right. And I'll tell you a story that Governor Pence brought to my attention one night. I was speaking and I didn't know he was going to be in the audience. And so after the after the speech was over, I got up and walked off stage, and one of the horse holders, Robert will know what this is, in Civil War, they had somebody that held the general's horse, one of the staff. And so one of the, they hate it when we call them that too. One of the horse holders came up and said, the governor wants to talk to you. Oh, okay, well, that's interesting. So I walk up and I get his attention, and he gave me the 1 minute type of thing. I said, he said, we walked down the hallway, and he says, I want to ask you about something. He says, this business, because we used to say we were second only to Washington, D.C. And so Governor Pence looks at me and he said, another way that could be said is that there's no state that has more monuments than we do. And I thought to myself, now there's a politician that Indiana's going to be number one. Absolutely. And so, yes, we have 48. We just dedicated the Gold Star Mother Monument on last Saturday, which is beautiful. It's on the corner of St. Clair and Penn, and you got to go see it. It's made out of black granite, and it is amazing. And we had more Gold Star families there than any event that I'd been to in probably 15 years. And so, and I was offered the chance to speak, and Governor Holcomb spoke, and then Woody Williams, the guy who started this, I think they've built 80 of these now, and so he is the only living World War II Medal of Honor recipient. And he spoke. He's 97 years old, and he's sharper than I'll ever be. I mean, the guy is just amazing. Didn't hardly use any notes at all, and was just a really, really interesting guy. So we have 48 monuments in Marion County. And then the other kind of fun fact is the fact that there's no place in the country that has more acreage honoring veterans than Indianapolis. And that's the reason for that is that we take care of 25 acres, but Crown Hill Cemetery, which is the third largest non-government cemetery in the country, they have 27 acres, and they have graves that stretch from Vietnam to up to about just before they started in World War II, and they go to Vietnam. And so and they have one Revolutionary War grave out there. So they have 4,000 graves there. And so between the two of us, we have more acreage than any other place in the country.
So our listeners have heard it here first. Indiana is the state with the most, is what I heard you say.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Robert, did you want to jump in here?
Well, I want to make sure, and I'm going to guess that most of the audience knows, but for those who don't, General Goodwin, please explain what a Gold Star family is.
Absolutely. In World War I, they started a Blue Star program and a Gold Star program. And so what would happen is that families that had a service member that was serving, they'd put a blue star in the window, would indicate that they had a person that was had taken the oath and put the cloth of the nation on their back and were serving. And when and if that they were killed in action, then the star turned to gold. And the fact is that there's people tell stories about they had 3-4 brothers that were serving in the military all at the same time during World War I, and they would put 3 and 4 stars in the window to just make sure that everyone was accounted for. And if I remember right, if memory serves, I think the Gold Star family program actually started in 1926 officially. But one of the things that is very important about this, and I think this tells a lot about Indiana, is the fact that the Indiana Code that was put together in 1920, it says that these properties are designated to honor veterans. There hasn't been a monument that's been put on that property since 1998. That's how high the standards are. And there have been 3 or 4 or 5 maybe people who wanted to put monuments on the property, but they didn't meet the standards and the commission did not approve them. And so what happened was that they met with us 4 times, and we eventually got to the point, because there were some people that thought, well, it doesn't say veterans' families, it says veterans. But the fact of the matter is the veterans' families do so much for the service member. In today's world, they just they have, the technology, and a lot of times one spouse had never taken care of the family finances, and now now that's their job, and to take care of the kids and to take care of all the things that go on with the families. And it was the right thing to do. And I think that, I even said in my speech, I said the warriors fight, but the family also serves.
Thanks for that and thanks, Robert, for asking that question. So before I leave my question time, Robert, can I ask a few more?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So, General, recent months, right? I don't know, maybe pre-COVID, some big changes happened on Monument Circle, and you had a lot to do with that. And so, first of all, if our listeners haven't been to Monument Circle of late, I would encourage them to do so. But talk about really the huge changes and the impetus behind those changes, and why, if our listeners have not been down to Monument Circle, they want to make sure that they make it a summer destination.
Well, we were told that the Lilly Endowment they had some money that they wanted to put into the downtown area. And so what happened was that the War Memorial Commission teamed up with Downtown Indy. So we, Sherry Syward, who I know has been on this program, great friend, and we sat down and we talked about doing a partnership between the War Memorial and Downtown Indy Inc. And so what happened was that we came up with a plan that we wanted to put a light show, and we wanted to put audio on the circle. And so I'm probably going to get these numbers wrong, but I think there was something like 354 applicants. And I think they got it down to, I think there was around maybe 16 or 17 that they chose. I do remember that there was only one that had more money involved in the grant than ours. And ours was around $8 million, and that one was around $9 million. And so what happened was that we do light shows every night now at dusk. And we project images on the IPL building and the building next door to it. And so what happens is that we have just an amazing team, innovative, with Conrad and Terry are part of that. And then we've got the Dodd folks, and they're the 1 and 0 people that can put all this stuff together. But what we want to do is that we tell stories about the military. We tell stories about when we have special events, like when we had the NCAA tournaments here, telling the story about history and Indiana basketball history and that kind of thing. VE Day, Victory over Europe, Victory over Japan, when those days roll around. We tell about Hoosiers that have been deployed. We talk about a lot of different things, and it's just kind of a good way to share that information. But I got to tell you, Danielle, the thing that I think adds to the circle as much as anything is that, one, it's not dark and dingy anymore. It's even when we don't have light shows, it's lit up. But the other thing I think is really cool is that it plays music. We play music downtown, and there's just something about the soothing the savage beast to rest, all that business. It's just music. It makes it like home downtown. And I think that it's one of the things that we're very proud to be involved with it. We do need to do some fundraising every year so we can keep it going, because the endowment, as you know, once they get you started, then you're on your own, which is fine. And so we're in the process of doing some fundraising. And I think that couldn't ask for a better partner than Downtown Indy. And so I'm glad you asked that question, because that's one I hadn't thought about talking about. But anyway, yeah, it's great. And it's every night at dusk. And then we do a thing at noon. We play the Star Spangled Banner at noon, and trying to educate people about stopping and putting their hand over their heart. And that's going to take a while, but we're working on it.
No, you're right. I was down last week for lunch, and it's breathtaking in the evening, but the music does make a difference. So
have you seen it when the monument, the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, is wrapped in the American flag?
No, it's like I said, it's breathtaking. I hope every single Hoosier who's listening and not listening gets to see it, and every person who ever visits our Circle City also gets to participate.
We get notes and cards and emails from a lot of people that had no idea.
Yeah, it's great. And I do want to ask before we're done with the show, Robert, about the special relationship the Girl Scouts does have with General Goodwin and flag retirement. But I want to turn it over to you for a bit, and then we'll come back to that later, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer, and our good friend P.E. McAllister, who served in the Air Corps during the Second World War, and was actually most people don't realize that all the invasions were called D-Day. There is the D-Day in June of 44, but all of them were D-Day in some regard. And P.E. McAllister washed ashore in North Africa, I think in November of 42, one of the very first in the European theater, as you would call it. Our guest on the Leaders and Legends podcast today is Brigadier General retired Stewart Goodwin, who's the executive director of the Indiana War Memorials Commission. A little bit more about General Goodwin. He was received 2 Legions of Merit, which is one of the absolute highest military decorations. He is a Sagamore of the Wabash. He's a member of the Indiana Military Veterans Hall of Fame, and something that I am sure is very close to his soul. He is an honorary survivor of the USS Indianapolis. General, we lost in the last few weeks some survivors of the USS Indianapolis. I know how close you are to them, how much they mean to you, how much that ship's record means to you. Please tell us a little bit about these 2 heroes.
Well, I think that Smith and Edgar Harrell, James Smith and Edgar Harrell, they meeting these men, and I got to tell you, Robert, when I started in this job in 05, there were 1,196 men on the ship. 30th of July was struck by 2 torpedoes from the Japanese submarine I-58. And so they actually shot 6 torpedoes, and 2 of them hit, one 40 feet from the bow in the front, and then the second one hit at midship where this ammunition and the fuel is stored. So the ship actually broke in 2 and sunk in 12 minutes. And I mean, it is, people talk about having honors, to sit down with these folks, and we actually are the ones that started their museum and put it in the Indianapolis and put it in the War Memorial. And so 1,196 out, go off the ship, and 316 came out of the water. The gentleman one of the gentlemen, Edgar Harrell, from Tennessee, and he was a Marine. Now, there were 39 Marines that were on the ship. And so their job was to guard this box that had mysteriously landed on the middle of the ship. Actually, it actually blocked the hangar where the airplanes used to come out. They had four airplanes. And so I became very close with him throughout the years. And the fact is that he was a very religious man, knew him much better than I knew Mr. Smith. But the fact is that he talked about the fact that it was God's will that he came out of the water. And to hear the stories about how they were in the water for 4.5 days with sharks attacking them. A lot of them didn't have life preservers. Some of them just were bobbing up and down in the water and with nothing to eat or drink for 4.5 days. And on day 3, it was that some of them started to drink the salt water. and it just makes your mind go crazy. I mean, you lose all sensibility. And they thought they were seeing islands out in the water, and they would break away from where the guys were. They were in little groups, and that they were actually just swimming out into the ocean. But I can tell you that every one of them that I ever met was a special person. And I know you've been around Medal of Honor recipients. They're cut from the same cloth. They don't think they're special. They don't think they did anything special. They just did their jobs. And so it is so humbling to be around those folks. And the fact is that they just want to tell their story. And so one of the things that I'm not even sure that this has been made public yet, but the talk is that when the last survivor dies, that the families and the legacy committee, the survivors committee, are going to continue to have the reunions every year, because this is a story that just needs to be told. And so we have the second watch, we have the family members, and we have the Lost at Sea folks who really, I believe, had the toughest time with all this, because in many cases, all they received was a telegram. Their families, all they received was a telegram. They don't have any dog tags. They don't have any uniforms. They don't have anything to continue to tell that story. And it's one that now that we're telling. And I think that we decided that we were going to build this. We were going to build this museum for them. And if you haven't seen it, come and see it, because it's we now have we have digital things where you can you can put one of the survivors' names in, somebody that was on the ship, that and you can track them.
And where's the museum located?
It's right in our building in the War Memorial. Just a real quick story, Robert, about you probably, for a long time, they kept saying there were 317 survivors. And what happened was, this is a great story, because there was a gentleman, and for the life of me, I can't remember his name, but they were walking, these folks were walking up the ramp to get on the ship. And just as this one fellow was getting ready to go, somebody pulled him out of line and says, "Hey, you've been selected to go to officer school." And so he backs down off of the ramp, but his name never came off the list.
Oh.
And so what happened was that the Navy called after the accident. The Navy wasn't really an accident. It was the ship was sunk. The Navy called his parents and said that on behalf of the Secretary of the Navy, we're sorry that your son has been lost at sea. And the mom says, "You're crazier than a bed bug. I talked to him last night."
God love the bureaucracy of the military hierarchy. Jiminy Christmas. Is there a particular Hoosier leader or legend whom you admire?
Oh my gosh, we'd be here a lot longer than I have time. Obviously, Sammy comes to mind.
And I was just going to say, and you can't say Sergeant First Class and Medal of Honor recipient Sammy Davis, and you can't say James O'Donnell either.
Okay, you're going to make this real difficult.
Or John McGough.
Or John, yeah, okay. Or John McGough. I think that the criteria that you've established is going to be real difficult for me to come up with just one. Because I tell you, Robert, every day I hear stories, and it really changed my life about the way that I talk to veterans. And that is because the first 6 months or so that I was there, actually the second day I was there, I made a rule about anytime a World War II veteran would come into the building, it doesn't matter where I am, just call me. I'll go up front and meet him. And so, yeah, if I'm in the middle of meeting, even if I had a meeting with you, Robert, I would say, excuse me, but I've got to go. Sorry, Robert, I know you're important, but in this case, I got to go see this World War II vet. And my father was a World War II vet. And so he was an Army combat engineer in Europe. And he rebuilt bridges in France, mostly after Hitler blew up the bridges. And so, the Greatest Generation, without a doubt, Brokaw had it right. But I'd hear these guys, because how it is when veterans get together. You say, hey, what branch were you in? And then you jab them a little bit about which one, which branch they were in or whatever. And then the second question, probably most asked, is, well, what did you do? And I'd hear these guys say, I was just a cook. I was just in supply. I never killed anybody. I never left the United States. And there was one day, and I swear, I wish I could remember the guy's name, because it was way back in 05. But this guy said he was just in supply. And I stopped him and I said, excuse me, but you have got to quit saying that. Because when you diminish your service, you diminish the service of all of us. And here's what I would ask you to think about. People like us who have served make up 1 out of 10 people who live in our country today. So we call it the 90-10 rule. We think that it's time that the 90% who didn't serve understand about what the 10% who did serve, what they did, so that we can all live free. And I asked this guy, I said, well, you were in supply. And did you ever think about the fact that if you didn't do what you do or did, the beans and bullets wouldn't have got to the front lines? And the fact is, the trucks wouldn't have had fuel. There wouldn't be bullets for the airplanes or the weapons. And he looked at me and he said, I never thought about it like that. And I said, well, what I would hope that you would do is that you would just think about how important that is. I've had guys say, I was a cook. I didn't do anything. I was just a cook. Well, listen, bud, if you didn't cook, people didn't eat. And the truth of the matter is that I've looked at hundreds of Manning documents over the years. I've never once seen one that said one E5 sergeant fluff or not needed.
Right.
Everybody's job was important, and one team, one fight. You know the deal. That's how we're put together. And so what we want to do then, and that's really the mission about the War Memorial, because what we want to do is that we're not going to teach them about strategy or tactics. We're not going to teach them the ranks. We're not going to teach them the battles. We're not going to teach them any of that stuff. But what we can teach them is that we can tell them about ordinary Hoosiers who have done extraordinary things.
Well, you mentioned a few minutes ago about members of the military honoring everyone else who served, while at the same time, talking a little smack and giving a little jab and that sort of thing. And that's part of it. And it's one of the most fun parts of it. Is there anyone who you've enjoyed jabbing more than Gregory A. Ballard, USMC? And talk a little bit about your friendship with him. Both of Mayor Ballard's inaugural ceremonies were held at the War Memorial, and there hadn't been a veteran in the mayor's office since Richard Lugar, unless my memory's failing me, but I think that's true. And you two have a very special friendship. I know he loves you. He thinks the world of you and your service. But you're an Air Force general. He's a Marine lieutenant colonel. I was just an Army corporal. But it was fun to be in your presence as you interacted. Tell us a little bit about that friendship.
Well, first of all, I have so much respect for him, not because of what he did as a mayor, but what he did as a service member. And the truth is that it was one of those things, Robert, where he and I just hit it off from the very beginning. And so, he gives as good as he gets. He's real big about making sure that you understand. And there were several times, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 times that he and I were on a dais together speaking. And so, it always seemed that he, because obviously being the mayor was a lot more important than I was. So I would speak before he would speak, and he would be the last one to speak. And so he would jam me up every time he got a chance. And it didn't matter how many people were there. And you see you knew him real well too. I mean, his eyes just lit up when he would get into that kind of a situation. So there was one night and I can't even remember what the event was, but there were 1,500 people there. And it just turned out that for some reason, I don't know why, but he spoke before I did. And when he started walking up there, I grabbed onto his jacket and I said, "Times have changed, buddy. I'm speaking after you." And he looked at me and he goes, "Oh my gosh, I forgot all about that." And of course, he jammed me up like he always does. And I said something about how much I enjoyed our friendship. And after it was over, he says, "Well, why didn't you say something about it?" I said, "Well, maybe next time. I just want the fear of what the next time is. I'd rather you live with that than to tackle you one time."
You mentioned about everybody's service in some ways being equal. I mean, the whether you volunteer, and one of the great things about the modern armed forces, let's say 21st century, is the number of young men and women who volunteered for the military after 9/11. So if you volunteer for the military in time of war, you have dramatically increased the chance that you will be in harm's way. As I've mentioned several times in this podcast, my son Joshua volunteered for the Army, and then he volunteered to be a combat infantryman and served 2 tours in Afghanistan. That doesn't diminish my service, but my service compared to his is they're just not on the same plane. So with the notion that everyone's service is equal, there are people whose service to the country stand out. And one of those, obviously, is our good friend, Sammy Davis, Sergeant First Class, who received the Medal of Honor in Vietnam. I find it difficult to be in his presence and not just either fall to pieces emotionally or just be in such awe of what he did and the lives he saved. Is that a feeling that occurs to you? You spent 37 years in the military. Do you still get that lump about particular people?
Absolutely. And the truth is that it's not just the recipients. And the recipients are obviously, they're at another level. But I think you would agree with this, is that there are people who never received the medal that probably had acts of heroism that were maybe even higher than some of the people who did. We have some guys in our museum that, they ended up with 3, 4 Purple Hearts, and but the fact is that when they were in service, their people skills were probably not what they should have been, and so nobody took the time to write them up. But obviously, there's people. Sammy and all of the recipients I've met, you can tell they're just cut from a different bolt of cloth, from the standpoint that it's not about them. It's about the people that they saved or the people that they served with at that particular point in time. When you think about the question that you asked me before, that I've kind of been thinking about a little bit about, you gave me, a list of people that you couldn't talk about. A Hoosier by the name of Jim Castler, who was a tail gunner, B-29 tail gunner in World War II, came back after the war and went to Butler, graduated from Butler, and then went back in the Air Force as an officer and became a fighter pilot. And so the next thing that comes up is Korea. And so what happens is that he's an ace in Korea. He's got 6 kills. After that's Vietnam, 181 combat missions. And one night over the north, he was doing a bomb damage assessment run, and SAM, surface-to-air missile, shot him out of the sky. And so he jumped out of the airplane, and he had a parachute malfunction. And when he hit the ground, he hit harder with one leg than the other, and the femur bone was jammed up into his intestines. And so he was in pretty bad shape, and took a couple days, but the VC found him. And I think that until the doctor actually got it, the VC doctor got his hands on him, it was maybe around 10 days. And they took his femur, which is the big bone between your knee and your hip, and they cut that all out and replaced it with a piece of rusty metal pipe, which immediately got infected. And so he went into the Hanoi Hilton with Stockdale, McCain, and that group. And he did 6.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton. And his son, also named James, this was a time when he was going through the formative years as a young man without his father, who turned out to join the Navy. And you'll remember when the Challenger went into the water, Jim Kassler was a hard hat Navy diver, and was very much involved with the extrication of the parts and some of the other things that were coming out of the water during that time. This guy had he had 3 Air Force Crosses, which was just below the Medal of Honor. And he's got 3 of them. If there was anybody that ever should have earned the Medal of Honor, it was Jim Kassler. And so it's important about having the hardware, but I hope you would agree that there's something about these people that have been through this and has changed them. I think it probably has made them more centered. It's also told them about how important it is to, like the Bible says, we need to take care of each other. We need to look out after each other. And so whether it's a biblical reason or whether it's teamwork that they learned in the military, but the fact of the matter is that these were somebody that when they were pushed to their worst day of their life, they stepped up and they did something that was honorable. And they, in many cases, like in Sammy's case, actually saved lives. And I think, when I think of something like that, I think, wow, I never have to worry about that, but to have that responsibility is something that's pretty heavy. And to do what they do, I think is just amazing. Because I've told Sammy this before, you never know how many lives you've touched. And the fact of the matter is that in a smaller way, I think all of us do that. I live in a world where I think people meet people because it's destiny. It's what God wants us to do. And I think he always wants us to help. And, you made a comment about, getting things done and that kind of business. I've had a lot of people help me throughout the years. And for me to become a general and not being married, almost never happens almost any time. And so the fact of the matter is that I think when you reach those ranks, I tell people this all the time, it has to deal with timing. It has to deal about your situation. And I think there's a lot of luck that goes along with it.
We're reviewing a litany of of Hoosier veterans, and there's two names I want to throw out there because I want to make sure that we don't forget them, because obviously the names are basically endless, right? There are 15 members of my family in my generation, the generation younger than me, and the generation older than me, who served in the United States military, including an uncle who drove a LST in Pacific, was at Okinawa, Tarawa, Kwajalein, Bougainville. And it's a fun family thing. And I always felt that the Indianapolis veterans community, or the Hoosier veterans community, is like a family. And two people whose service we have benefited from. And I just want to ask if you knew them very quickly before we have Danielle Shockey ask you the final 5 questions. And those two people are Andy Jacobs Jr. and former Governor Joe Kernan.
Oh my gosh. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Those are two men. Andy Jacobs. Let's talk about Andy Jacobs first, Korean vet. We would have Veterans Day programs, and I don't care how cold it was. I don't care if it was snowing or sleeting or whatever. He would be in a suit jacket. And not once did I ever see that man with an overcoat on. And if you know anything about, the Korean war vets, because of the Chosun Reservoir, and they refer to it as the frozen chosen, just terrible time because they didn't have the right equipment that they needed, but the temperatures were just unbearable. But typical, you talk about the quintessential Hoosier, I think of Andy Jacobs. And just, you couldn't ask for a nicer guy. And you talk about one of the most unpretentious people I ever met was Congressman Jacobs. I'm sorry, but I get a little teary when I think about Governor Joe. He was one of my mentors, and really got to know him. We did the flyover for Governor O'Bannon's funeral, and I don't know if you were there or not, but it was on the west side of the State House, and it was a beautiful day. And we had the Vipers come just north to south, and they were perfect. The timing was just perfect. And so I got to know Governor Joe, and it was I don't know, for some reason he took a liking to me, and so we just became friends. And there was a time when we would make arrangements for him to speak at different POW events. And for those that haven't followed Governor Joe, he did 11 months in the Hanoi Hilton. He was a backseater in a Vigilante, which is a Navy jet. And saying he's a backseater, he was a radio operator and a weapons operator. And so the pilot, and both of them have to be aviation rated, but the pilot sits up in the front, and the Rio or the weapons operator sits in the back. Anyway, they were up on the north in Vietnam, and they took a missile. They took a SAM. And so the plan was to try to get to the water, to get to the ocean, so they could jump, get out. It wouldn't be in VC territory. So what happened was that didn't happen, and what happened was that they got captured. So so he does 11 months in the Hanoi Hilton, and we had an idea about, we wanted to honor 2 or 3 Hoosiers who had amazing military careers and then went into politics. And so the 3 that we chose were, obviously Kernan was one of them. And then we had Senator Lugar was the second one. And the third one was our good friend from Rome, Indiana. You know who I'm talking about?
Oh, not off the top of my head.
Okay, another hint. He was the last governor to be served one term.
Oh, yeah, Whitcomb.
Yeah, exactly.
Whitcomb. I didn't know where he was from, but Whitcomb's story about his exploits. I mean,
Brigadier.
if it's not a movie, I don't know what is.
Yeah. So anyway, and so what we did was my job was to get the artifacts from all of them. And so I called up Governor Joe and I said, hey, he and Maggie had just moved into a new condo up in South Bend. And if you don't know about Governor Joe, you ought to read about him because, he had the baseball career and he's big fundraiser for Notre Dame. And he's just Mr. South Bend, he's done everything up there. And so I said, hey, Governor, I said, we're gonna put some politicians in the museum because we think it's important for people to know that service members and politicians, a lot of people have done that, but not like the ones that we're going to choose. And we want you to be in it. And he said, no, Stuart. He says, I'm not worthy of that. I said, don't argue with me, Governor, because we're going to do that. And I want to know when I can come to South Bend and look at your artifacts. And he said, you can come up anytime. And I said, okay. So we went up and I took one of my museum people with me. And we were going through the boxes and I was opening up boxes. Everybody was opening up boxes. And I opened up this box. And inside of it, Robert, was a striped POW uniform.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I looked at it and I looked at him and I said, how in the world did you get that out of there? He says, I put in a duffel bag and got on the airplane. Well, for those that are not familiar with that, because people that are in the age group where they remember seeing the Vietnam POWs, our people that were in captivity, they always showed them in the dark brown, the brown khaki type with the pants and the jacket matched. But when they were behind the wire, they had these striped purple, and they were actually kind of a grape color with gray stripes on it. So I looked at it and he said, what that is, don't you? I said, yes, sir, I sure do. And he says, do you want it? And I said, oh, he says, let me think about it. And I said, okay. So I just dropped it right there because of the hesitation. And so we were talking about some other stuff, and we finally got the stuff, and I just put it back in the box and put it back where I found it. And so we go downstairs, and Maggie was down there. So I got a big hug from Maggie, and she's just a wonderful person. And she goes, Joe, because she wanted to get that stuff out of the house. That's what she wanted to do. She wanted to get as much of it out of the house as possible. And she said, Joe, did you take care of Stuart and the other fellow? I said, yeah. He says, yeah, well, they did. He says, he wants the POW uniform, but I said, I think I'm going to hold on to it a little bit. I said, that's great. And she looked at him and she went, Joe, go get it. Give it to him. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm in the middle of a family feud here. I said, no, really, it's okay. Whenever you're ready, we'll be happy to have it. Joe, like that. And he went and got it. And now we have it on display. But just a real quick story about Governor Joe. And I think this says amazing things about the man. Remember when I told you the vigilante was shot down by a surface air missile?
Right.
What happened was Joe found out who fired that SAM, and they became best of friends. And Joe went to visit him in Vietnam several times. They were Facebook buddies. They talked about their grandkids. And he actually traveled to Vietnam to spend time with this guy that shot a surface air missile to blow him out of the sky. You don't meet people like that every day. And just an amazing person.
Or ever.
Exactly.
I was communications director for the Indiana Republican Party from May 2006 to October 2007. And the entire time I worked for Murray Clark and Jennifer Hollowell and Kevin Ober at the Indiana Republican Party, I wore Joe Kernan's POW bracelet.
Oh, wow.
And nobody ever told me that I shouldn't or I couldn't. We've come to the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask our guest the same 5 questions. You're joining an elite crew here, General Goodwin. So let's hope your answers measure up to Mayor Ballard's, or you're in big trouble.
Well, the bar
Danielle.
better be a little bit higher than that, but just not low.
Danielle, are you ready?
I'm ready. All right, General. What was your very first job?
Working in a gas station.
Okay. How about your first concert?
I believe it was the Beach Boys.
I think that's been given before, but what a good one. How about a book that you've read that you would recommend to others, you'd recommend to our listeners?
Absolutely, called The General and the Jaguar. It's an amazing book because what it does is it talks about Pancho Villa and General Blackjack Pershing. And so what Pancho Villa was Mexico, obviously, and what he was doing was that he was coming across the border and terrorizing the towns along the border to the point where he would get the young men that were military age, and he'd bring one out into the middle of the town and shoot him and say, okay, who's going to be the next one? Are you going to come and be with us and fight, or are you going to get shot? And so the Jaguar was Pancho Villa, and the General was General Blackjack Pershing. And what it does is it talks about him, because I know you don't have much time, but the fact is he is the most senior military person in the history of our country. He achieved something that only one other person had achieved, and that was a guy named George Washington, but he never wore the rank. Pershing did wear the rank, and the fact of the matter was that he was the most senior person ever, even with 5-star generals during World War II, because that was a temporary rank. And so that's why we have Pershing Auditorium, and he was in charge of all the Americans during World War I. Just an amazing man. But that story about these two minds, and General Pershing never did catch him.
The General and the Jaguar. That's the title, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. Okay. Next question. If you could be there and witness yourself a moment in history, what moment would you want to have witnessed?
The day that General Pershing, the 4th of July in 1927, when General Pershing laid the cornerstone for the War Memorial.
Excellent. And then
what a great answer.
Yes, it is. And so the last of the 5 questions, General, if you could have 2 hours off the record dinner with somebody who is living, who would you want to sit down and talk to?
That is a real tough one. I can tell you it wouldn't be a movie star. It wouldn't be an athlete. It would be someone that had done something very special for their country.
I've got a hint. I've got a suggestion that takes both those into account.
I'm ready.
Gary Sinise.
Gary Sinise would definitely be on the list. I think that the other one I was thinking about was a Medal of Honor recipient by the name of Del Crandall, helicopter pilot. But any of the recipients that I've met would love to do that, because it's they're special. And the fact of the matter is that, and if I could, I just want to leave you with one thought, and that is that these people that have put the cloth of their nation on their backs, and we all took an oath. And that oath says that we'll obey the orders that those appointed over us. It will defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And after we take that oath, so help me God, they put a piece of paper. And Robert, I know you remember the day you took that oath, because we all remember that. But what you're doing when these young people and everyone who's ever joined the United States military takes that oath, what you're saying is that you will give up to and including your life to protect people, Americans, that you'll never know or never meet, so that they can live free. And when you think about it, that's quite a promise. And so when I meet any veteran, I don't care what their job was. I don't care how many years or, they served at all. But I think that one of the things that we need to do in this country is that we need to forget about all this differences, and we need to think about what makes us the same. And what makes us the same is that we're Americans. And I got to tell you, I have a really bad feeling that if we don't turn this around and start thinking about, regardless of our color or race or skin or our sexual orientation or political ambition, if we don't turn this around, somebody else is going to tell us how to live. And we won't like it. We won't like it at all. We are Americans first. And all these people that went before us and the things that they did so that we can live free. And we got to quit taking that for granted, because it's not something that needs taken for granted. What we need to do is that we need to start thinking about what's really important in this country. And that is that we're all the same. One team, one fight.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery. Your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today has been retired Brigadier General Stewart Goodwin, who runs, if I may say, the most efficient operation in the most beautiful building in this state, and that is the Indiana War Memorial. Our co-host has been Girl Scouts Central Indiana CEO Danielle Shockey. General, thank you very much for your time today. We enjoyed it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.